Springfield, Massachusetts. A long brick armory beside a river, sometime in the 1930s. It's early, before the shift, and most of the building is dark. But there's a light on at one bench, and a man bent over it in his shirt sleeves, filing a small piece of steel by hand. He does this a lot. He barely speaks, and when he does, it's with a French-Canadian accent he never lost, soft enough that men lean in to catch it. The others at the armory think he's a little odd. There's a story they tell about him, the kind that follows a quiet man around. That one winter he flooded the concrete floor of his own cellar so he could lace up his skates and glide around underneath his house before work. They say it half as a joke, but the man who skates in his basement is, at this bench, doing something none of them fully grasp yet. His name is John Garand, and the little steel part he is shaping, by hand, on a government salary, is going to end up in the hands of roughly 6 million American soldiers. Here is the part that stops people the first time they hear it. He will never make a single dollar from it, not one. 6 million rifles, a weapon that one of America's most famous generals will call, in writing, the greatest battle implement ever devised. And the man who spent 15 years of his life building it will walk away with the salary he was already being paid, and a government pension, and nothing else. Tonight's file is about that rifle, and about that man, because to understand why a generation of German soldiers came to dread the sound of American infantry coming through a hedgerow, you have to understand what this quiet immigrant put into the hands of every ordinary private, and to understand him, you have to understand what he refused to take. Stay with me, because it ends with a promise his own country made him, in writing, and then quietly let die. Before we get to the man, let's get to the problem, because for the whole story to land, you have to feel what infantry combat actually was, everywhere in the world, for the 50 years before this rifle. A soldier carried a bolt-action rifle. Here's what that means, second by second, in a fight. You bring the rifle up, you aim, you fire one shot, and then, before you can fire again, you have to reach up with your hand and work the bolt, lift it, pull it back to throw the empty brass case out, push it forward to load the next round, push it down to lock it. Only then can you aim and fire again. A well-trained man could do all of that fast. The British made an art of it. But speed was never really the point. The point was the cost, and the cost was always the same. For one moment, every time, your eyes came off the enemy and your hands came off the aim. In a close fight, that moment is everything. That moment is when the other man moves. That moment is when you lose him in the smoke, or he crosses the last few yards, or he fires first, and every army on earth had simply decided to live with that moment. The German Mauser, the rifle a German soldier carried into this war, was bolt action. The British Lee Enfield, bolt action. The rifle your own great-grandfather may have carried in the First War, bolt action. It wasn't a failure of imagination. It was just understood, the way gravity is understood, that a rifle is a thing you work by hand between each shot. Now hold that picture, and change one thing. Picture a soldier who can fire, and fire again, and again, 8 times, as fast as he can pull the trigger, and never once take his eyes off the man he is shooting at. No bolt. No pause. The rifle throws out its own empty cases, and loads the next round itself. His eyes never leave the target. His hands never leave the aim. That is the entire story, right there, in the difference between those two soldiers. One of them lives in the moment where his hand is on the bolt. The other one doesn't have that moment at all. And the man who took that moment away and handed the result to millions of teenagers is the quiet one at the bench in Springfield. So who was he? John Garand was born in Quebec, in Canada, on New Year's Day, and came down into New England as a boy when his family crossed the border looking for work. There was no money, and there was no fancy schooling. As a child, he went into the textile mills that ran that whole corner of the country, a bobbin boy, oiling the machines, one more immigrant kid feeding the looms. But he did the thing that self-taught men do. He couldn't leave the machines alone. He learned how every part of them moved, and why, and what happened when you changed it, and by the time he was a young man he had turned himself from a mill boy into a master machinist and toolmaker, the kind of man a shop is lucky to have. He had a feel for metal. He also, it turned out, had a feel for firearms, and he began sketching and building his own designs on his own time. When the First War came, that hobby got noticed. The government was hungry for anyone who could design weapons, and Garand's work put him in a room with the people who mattered. And in 1919, the United States government hired him and set him down at Springfield Armory with one long assignment: build America a better infantry rifle. Give the ordinary soldier a rifle that reloads itself. It took him the better part of 15 years. I want you to sit with that number, because it's the real measure of the man, not a flash of genius in an afternoon. 15 years. 15 years of filing parts by hand, of building a mechanism and testing it, and watching it fail, and going back to the bench to start the part over. 15 years of a problem so hard that every other army on Earth had given up on solving it at scale. He wasn't chasing a fortune while he did it. And this is important. As a government employee, anything he invented on the job belonged to the government, by law. He knew that going in, he signed up for it. He wasn't building a rifle to get rich. He was building it because the problem was there, and he could not put it down. And the rifle that finally came off that bench was adopted by the United States Army in 1936. Its official name was plain: U.S. Rifle, Caliber 30, M1. Everyone would come to call it by the name of the man, the Garand. The moment it was adopted, it made history, and most of the men carrying it never knew. The M1 became the first semi-automatic rifle ever issued as the standard weapon to every soldier in a major army. Not a special weapon for the best marksman, not a limited experiment for one unit. Standard. Every man. When the Second World War began, it was the only rifle of its kind in the world in general issue, and only one nation had it. That decision, every private, not just the specialists, is the whole ball game, and I'll show you exactly why in a minute. There was one quirk to how it worked, and it became the most famous thing about the rifle. It fed from a metal clip that held 8 rounds, loaded in from the top. And when the 8th and last round fired, the empty clip was thrown clear of the rifle automatically, and it made a sound. A bright, high, metallic ping that you could hear over the noise of a fight. Soldiers had a lot of feelings about that ping, but think about what the ping actually is. It is the sound of a man who has just fired 8 aimed shots, as fast as he could pull the trigger, without ever working a bolt. And now multiply that sound across an entire squad, across a whole line of men. That is not a sound the enemy had ever had to reckon with before. And reckon with it they did. Now cross the line. Stand in a German position in the hedgerows of Normandy in the summer of 1944, and let's talk about what those men were actually built to expect. Here is the key to the entire war between these two infantries, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The German squad was not built around the rifleman, it was built around one machine gun. The MG42, a belt-fed gun that fired so fast, the individual shots blurred into a single tearing sound, one long ripping note that the men on the receiving end nicknamed after a saw. In the German squad, that gun was the point. That gun was where the firepower lived. The riflemen around it existed to a real degree, to serve it, to carry its ammunition, to spot for it, to protect it, to keep it fed and firing. And the rifles those men carried themselves were bolt-action Mausers, fine rifles, the same basic rifle from the last war. So a German soldier had a very clear mental model of an enemy squad, and it had served him well from Poland to the gates of Moscow. Find the machine gun, that's where the danger is. Kill the gun, and what's left is just men working bolts by hand, one shot at a time. And then he met an American squad, and the model broke in his hands. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because the cheap version of this story isn't true, and you deserve the real one. The Americans had a squad automatic weapon too, a heavy automatic rifle called the BAR. It wasn't that one side had a machine gun and the other didn't. The difference was what sat on top of that. In the German squad, kill the gun and the firepower collapses. In the American squad, there was no single thing to kill, because every man beside the automatic rifle was also, himself, a source of fast, aimed, self-loading fire. The firepower wasn't in one place, it was in every place at once. And from 100 yards away, in the noise and the smoke, a line of men each firing a Garand as fast as they could aim did not sound like riflemen. It sounded like automatic weapons. German accounts of fighting the Americans come back to this over and over. They badly overestimated how many machine guns they were facing, And how many men? Because the sheer volume of self-loading rifle fire painted a picture of an enemy far heavier than the one actually in front of them. You could not shut that squad up by finding its gun. The gun was everywhere. It was in the hands of the teenager, the clerk, the farm boy, every one of them. And here's the part almost nobody tells you. Germany knew. Germany saw exactly what the Garand was and wanted its own, badly. They were not fools, and they were not blind. They designed and built semi-automatic rifles of their own during the war, the Gewehr 41 and then the improved Gewehr 43. Some German soldiers did carry them. So why didn't it change anything? Why did the ordinary German infantryman work his bolt by hand to the very last day of the war? Because the rifle was never the hard part. That's the whole secret. The steel, the mechanism, the engineering, Germany could do all of that. German engineering was second to none. The hard part was the idea underneath the rifle. To make the Garand mean something, you had to build your entire army around a single, radical bet. That you would put that much firepower into the hands of every ordinary private, and trust him with it. And organize your whole squad, your whole doctrine, your whole system of factories, around him instead of around the gun. Germany had spent 20 years building the opposite army. You cannot swap the philosophy of an army in the middle of losing a war. Their semi-autos came too late, in the wrong numbers, and never reached the mass of ordinary men. The idea arrived, but there was no longer an army that could receive it. That is the honest answer to the question in the title. Germany didn't fail to copy the rifle because the engineering defeated them. They failed because the rifle was the easy half. The hard half was the idea, and by the time they wanted the idea, it was too late to become the kind of army that could use it. Because in the end, that's what this file is really about. It was never really about a rifle. It was about an idea, and about where a country decides to place its trust. Every army, whether it ever says the words out loud or not, has to answer one question: where does the power live, and who do we trust to hold it? Germany answered it one way: the power lives in the gun, in the specialist weapon, in the small number of men trained to serve it, and the ordinary rifleman is there to support them. It's a reasonable answer. It won a lot of battles. America made a different bet. It kept everything else: the machine guns, the mortars, the automatic rifles, all of it. But on top of all of that, it did the thing no one else did. It pushed real, fast firepower down into the hands of every ordinary private. The farm kid from Iowa, the clerk from Brooklyn, the teenager who'd never held a rifle a year before. It handed him a weapon that assumed he was good enough to be trusted with 8 fast-aimed shots and the judgment to use them well. And then it built the whole squad on the assumption that he would be. Picture what that trust actually looks like at ground level. A 19-year-old, a year out of a school he maybe never finished, alone at the corner of a field somewhere in France. No officer at his shoulder. A German section moving somewhere in the hedge in front of him. In the old world, his rifle gives him one shot, and then a moment on the bolt in which to decide the rest of his life. In this new one, it gives him 8, as fast as he can aim, and it trusts him to pick the moment himself. Nobody in Springfield ever knew his name. But the entire rifle was built on the belief that he was out there, and that he could carry it. That is an enormous bet to place on ordinary people. And it ran, every bit of it, on John Garand's 15 years at that bench. Because a bet like that is only possible if the rifle actually works. If it works in mud, in sand, in snow, in the hands of a scared 19-year-old who has never cleaned a weapon properly in his life. If it's reliable enough, and simple enough, and cheap enough to build 6 million of them and hand them out to a whole nation of amateurs and trust everyone to fire when the trigger is pulled. The Doctrine was America's. But the thing that made the Doctrine buildable, the bridge between a bold idea and 6 million working rifles, was the patience of one quiet immigrant who filed the parts until they were right. The steel was Springfield's. The idea was America's. The bridge was a man who never once asked what it was worth to him. Which brings us back, one last time, to that man at the bench. When the war was over, a few people in Washington finally did the arithmetic on John Garand. 6 million rifles, a weapon their own top generals said no enemy could match. And the man who designed it, living on an ordinary government salary, owed nothing at all by the strict letter of the law, and owed a very great deal by any measure a decent person would use. So a bill was introduced in Congress to give him $100,000. Not a fortune, even then. A thank you, in money from the country his rifle had helped to defend. It never passed, and by every account, he didn't make a fuss about it. He stayed at the armory, kept working, kept tinkering with the thing until he retired in the 1950s and went on skating on that flooded cellar floor of his. He had taken a problem that every army on Earth had given up on, and he had solved it, and then he had handed the solution to his country and asked for nothing back. That, for John Garand, seemed to be payment enough. So the next time you hear it, that bright metallic ping in the background of some old war film, the sound of an empty clip spinning away into the dirt, listen to it differently, because that little sound is his handwriting. It's the sound of one ordinary private, somewhere in a hedgerow, who kept his eyes on the enemy and fired 8 times without a pause, because a quiet man in Massachusetts spent 15 years of his life making sure that he could, and gave it away for free. Before you go, I've got a question for you. Did anyone in your family serve? Tell me about them in the comments. A name, a unit, a story handed down. These files only survive because people take the time to tell them. And if you've stayed this long, 3 small things help keep this channel going. If you haven't liked the video, it takes a second, and it goes a long way toward putting this story in front of the people who'd want it most. Subscribe, so you don't miss the next file. I open one every week. And share this one with someone who'd enjoy it. Until next time, take care.